Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight we have Steve McPherson giving a talk on the plurality of existences. I'm very excited for this talk tonight. He always brings some very interesting things to the table and an interesting perspective. So I welcome everyone here. Let's bring ourselves here to this moment and join in a short prayer. So tonight we welcome each other for another experience, sharing ideas, learning new things, embracing more love and peace into our hearts. We ask for understanding and patience during these times where there's a lot of stress and a lot of uncertainty. We understand that we are all brothers and sisters on this planet, helping each other and supporting each other. And by doing that, we will all move forward and progress. Let us be open and embrace the message of tonight. And with that, we begin the work and the talk of tonight. So, in a few moments, we will be joined by Steve here in the front, talking about the plurality of existences. Got me there. And yeah, stand by. Thank you.
Oi, hello, good evening. All right. So good evening, everyone. My name is Steve. I don't know if many already introduced me. I'm sorry, we're trying to sort out some technical issues with our streaming setup. But hopefully we're online, hopefully you're watching, and hopefully you can hear me clearly. That's the most important part. And hope everybody's doing well. I got a thumbs up from the back. So welcome everyone. And well, I thought tonight maybe we could talk about the plurality of existences. And that is a tough word to say, plurality. What does that mean? Multiple existences. So, all right. So, I like this topic because it has to do with my background, my personal history. I was raised in, it's kind of tough to say this in a Spiritist center. I was raised in a Christian family, and that means something different than, when you say it to Spiritists, because Spiritists are Christian. So let's just say I was raised in a different type of Christian family. So in my family, we never spoke about reincarnation. So this is a new topic for me. So I still consider myself pretty new here, new to the center and new to Spiritism. So it's only been about 5 years. So I still feel pretty new. Somebody asked me one time, it was in 2015, somebody said to me, what do you think about reincarnation? And at the time, all I had to say was like, well, I don't really know. I don't really have the evidence like for it or against it. It seems interesting, but at that time, I really had nothing to say about it. So it wasn't until I picked up the Spirits book by Allan Kardec and started to read, actually in the introduction to the Spirits book. The Spirits book has 1,019 questions, which are all really good. But before all that, there's, I want to say about 70 pages or so of introduction. And that's actually where Allan Kardec, in his own writing, convinced me that reincarnation was, you know, not just something to pay attention to, but it was actually the answer to so many of the existential questions that I had. And so, so now I can say I'm a firm believer in reincarnation. And Alan Kardec says, like, it really doesn't matter too much. I'm trying to paraphrase a little bit. He has this thing he says where it's not exactly important if you believe it or if you don't believe it, because if reincarnation exists, it exists because it's a force of nature. So it's it's because as a force of nature, if you believe in it or if you don't believe in it, it doesn't really matter, because it'll either happen or it won't happen. You know, so from that point on, we can talk about it, right? We can talk about its merit. So in my personal studies, I've been reading a little bit of the gospel, and I happen to be I'm slowly reading through the gospel according to Spiritism, and I'm in chapter 4, which is, the title of the chapter is, No One Can Enter the Kingdom of Heaven Unless He is Born Again. And so that's why I thought, well, this is a good topic to talk about. It's sort of an extensive chapter, and there's a lot of different topics in it, and I don't really have time or want to try to hit everything, but there's a few things I sort of thought that really stand out and are interesting to me, and I thought maybe we could talk about it tonight. So the chapter starts out, like many of the chapters in the gospel, in Alan Kardec's The Gospel According to Spiritism, it starts out with some Bible verses. And for me, this is really interesting because as a child, I grew up reading a lot of these verses, and a lot of them really didn't make a lot of sense to me at the time, or they were explained to me a certain way. And now, like with the reading that I have today, that we have in the gospel, right. We need to sort that out. Okay. So, where was I? We're talking about the gospel, we're talking about Alan Kardec, and we're talking about the Bible verses. And a lot of the verses in the Bible don't really make a lot of sense until, to me, they didn't make very much sense until reading Alan Kardec helped to put it into context. So let's get into it. The first one, when you open this chapter 4 in the gospel, there's actually like 3 different verses that kind of come up, 3 little sections that come up right away. So the first one is a story about Jesus and his disciples, and we're in Matthew 16, and this is verse 13 and 14. So when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Now, this is a little bit of a different translation than the translation. I got this from online just to make it easier for me to copy and paste it. But he says, who do people say the Son of Man is? He's talking about Jesus. He says, he's trying to say, who are people saying I am? Who do people say that I am as Jesus? And the disciples replied, some say you are John the Baptist, others say you are Elijah, and still others say Jeremiah or one of the prophets. So this is interesting. So this is kind of like getting into it. So do we know who John the Baptist is? I thought maybe I would come here tonight and talk about John the Baptist, and I don't want to say not in my research, but I Wikipedia'd John the Baptist just so I was like, maybe I could just like come with this big thing about John the Baptist, and it gets deep. So I recommend, if you're interested in that, if you don't know about John the Baptist, go ahead and read about it, because there's a lot of stuff in there. Like, it's interesting. And the interesting thing is that there's a lot of, in the New Testament that we have today, that's available to us today, there's 4 accounts by the apostles. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And in these 4 accounts, according to what I read on Wikipedia, which may or may not be true, there was 4 different accounts of John the Baptist and the story and what happened. So it's interesting. You really have to like sort of read it all and sort of gather and make and use your common sense. And then there's a lot of scholars who've studied it. It's very interesting. But from my understanding, John the Baptist was this guy who was born before Jesus, I believe. And from the story that I remember, like Jesus and the disciples came upon him, and he was in a river. I think it was the River Jordan. And he was baptizing people. So people would come in the river and he would immerse them in water. And this was like a symbol of, awakening. And so people would come and I believe in the story it goes, like Jesus actually was baptized by John the Baptist. That's in one of the accounts. Then some of the other accounts don't always mention that. But one of the accounts actually mentions Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist. And so it's interesting. Now, the rest of the story goes that King Herod didn't appreciate what John the Baptist was doing and had him beheaded. So that's another part of it. But let's continue. In Matthew 17, so this is the next chapter in Matthew, the disciples asked Jesus, why then do the teachers of the law, we're talking about the Hebrews, the Hebrew law, why do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? So in the Hebrew law, it said that Elijah would come, he would return, because Elijah was around in Old Testament days. This is like long, long ago, that Elijah would return and prepare the way for the Messiah to come. So the disciples say, why do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first? Jesus replied, to be certain, to be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But wait, but I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. So now Jesus is saying, not only has Elijah has already come. All right, I'm getting ahead of myself. But then the disciples understood that he was talking to them about John the Baptist. So this is where, in the Gospel According to Spiritism, Allan Kardec starts to raise a lot of questions and make some commentary. And I found this really fascinating when I read this for the first time. And these passages were familiar to me from having grown up, listening to things like this. And it's funny because as I was growing up, never really thought about it, But, I always had questions. Always never really got the answers I needed. But in this case, it was this was one of the ones I sort of glazed over because I had a lot of other problems with some of the stuff that I was taught growing up. But in this case, and Allan Kardec makes this interesting talk about that in those days where the teachers of the Hebrew law might use a word like resurrection instead of calling it reincarnation. But it sort of implies that the person's body comes back, they come back in their original form. And when we're talking about Elijah, he had been disincarnated for hundreds of years. So his body had been, disintegrated and, decomposed or whatever, and for a long, long time. So there was just no way, it's physically impossible for his body to come back and for him to return that way. So when we talk about it in the context of reincarnation, well, this makes sense. So this is one of those cases that, Spiritists love to talk about, reincarnation. It can be found in the Bible, and I've heard stories about how different groups were interested in trying to remove all the evidence of reincarnation from the Bible, but this is one that we still have. Sometimes it's used under a different name, resurrection, but in this case, it's the spirit of Elijah was alive in John the Baptist. So this I always found interesting. And it's important to talk about because like I sort of have sort of a disconnect from the religion I was taught as I was growing up in my youth, and and Spiritism is not a religion, but we can use a lot of the same teachings, and we can learn from them, we can benefit from them. Spiritism is a philosophy and a science with moral implications, and we can use this to answer some of those questions that burn inside of us that we can't figure out, like these existential kind of questions. Why am I here? Where did I come from? Where am I going? And why do bad things happen to good people? Why is there suffering on this earth? So I've always found that fascinating. There's another story that comes after that, and I don't know if I should read this entire thing. So there was this guy named Nicodemus, and he was a Pharisee. And the Pharisees are the Hebrews who are like well-versed in the law, the law of Moses. Moses gave us the 10 Commandments, but he also created 247 civil laws. So a lot of those were appropriate for the people of their time, but they're not exactly appropriate for us in modern times. The 10 Commandments were, given to us as a way to live, but some of those civil laws don't really apply to modern day times. But Nicodemus was he was a Pharisee, and he was well versed in the Hebrew law. He came to Jesus at night, like in private, and he said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher who has come from God, for no one could perform the signs you are doing if God were not with him." And Jesus replied to him, "Very truly, I tell you, no one can see the kingdom of God unless they are born again." So, to me, as I was growing up, and I was going to, to church and everything, this is where they would tell you a long explanation of what does it mean to be born again, and what does that mean to us. But it's funny how like certain people will take things in the Bible very, very literally when they should be taken figuratively. We should, when we're talking about a talking snake and the earth being created in 6 days, and some people will say like, well, that happened. That was definitely, just as it's written, so it should be. But in this case, when Jesus says, we must be born again, well, no, that was an analogy. He didn't mean like actually become born again. He wasn't talking about reincarnation. So it's funny how people will try to interpret things, what's convenient for them. But in this case, Jesus tells Nicodemus, we must be, when he says no one can enter or can see the kingdom of God, what is he talking about? He's trying to say, advancement, evolution, our personal, as far as we go, living as spirits, as we try to dematerialize, as we try to, shed our bonds to material life, to the corporeal senses. So, as we're trying to evolve and move on to a spirit life, he says we have to be born again. So, and Nicodemus, he's like, what are you talking about? Nicodemus, he says, how can somebody be born when they're old? And surely they cannot enter into their mother's womb a second time. He's like, I don't know if he's sort of like mocking him, if he's really like just can't figure it out. But Jesus tells him, very truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of the water and the Spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh, but Spirit gives birth to spirit. So when Jesus says born of the water and the Spirit, what he's talking about is obviously the Spirit is a separate thing from the water. And in those times when they talked about water, water was considered to them we have to consider that this is 2,000 years ago, and before it, I was going to say how much science has gone on in the last 2,000 years. We're talking about before the Dark Ages even. They considered water to be the primary generative element. So in their texts, in their religious texts, they believed that the land actually emerged out of the water, that the water was there, and the water sort of created this land and generated these animals and everything else that flowed from it. From just being born and being limited to whatever they could observe with their eyes, this is like the best they could think of. This is like what they imagined. So in these terms, what Jesus is saying to him is that, water or matter gives birth to matter, but the spirit gives birth to spirit. So he's making this distinction between the material life and the spiritual life. He says, "You should not be surprised at my saying, 'You must be born again.' The wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit." So he's telling him the Spirit is independent of matter, and just making that analogy for him, like it's almost like the wind, like it can it can kind of move around and it's unpredictable. As far as from our observation in our material being. Nicodemus asks, "How can this be?" And Jesus says, "You're the teacher in Israel, and you do not understand this." He says, "Very truly, I tell you, we speak of what we know, and we testify of what we have seen, but still you do not accept our testimony. I have spoken to you of earthly things, and you do not believe. How then will you believe if I speak of heavenly things?" How can, at this time, 2,000 years ago, how can Jesus even show somebody or explain to somebody about the spiritual life when they still won't even accept things that they can see and hear? He even goes on. So in this next passage, he says, "Whoever has ears, let them hear. Whoever has eyes, let them see." And he goes on to tell his disciples, talking about John the Baptist, that if you're willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come. So it's an interesting thing talking about, what was John the Baptist doing, preparing the way, and as I was reading about it, they get into this whole commentary about the fact that John the Baptist was out there baptizing people, but Jesus never actually followed him. So they were actually wondering what was their actual relationship. There's a lot of questions out there about that, but I don't know. It's kind of buried in history, and I don't know if we'll ever really find that out. But it's interesting. But Jesus is here telling his disciples, in this case, Elijah returned as John the Baptist. So this is just one evidence of reincarnation found in the Bible. So there's another part in this book, in this chapter 4, where they talk about Job, and it's interesting because I was thinking about actually when I was growing up, they told us about Job, and it's interesting because I used to go to church every weekend, and for I want to say several years that there was a man who would take us kids aside, for an hour or so and do a lesson with us, and I just started thinking about it because there's people here at the center that do the same thing with other kids, and I never really thought about the fact that this is about 30 years later that I still remember the story about Job, that this guy from my church actually studied with us, I still remember the story like so clearly. And I talked to other people, and some people I know have never even heard of Job, and they don't really know what it's about, because it's a fascinating story. And this is one of those things that's from the Old Testament. I'm not sure if it's actually a true story about a real guy named Job, or if it's just something like, you know, an analogy or like a fable. But it's an amazing story about Job was a man who was rich, and he had, you know, a huge family and all this cattle, and you know, that's like back in the day, that meant like you were a wealthy man. And what happened was his family got sick. I don't know if they got the plague or what happened exactly. His whole family died. All his cattle died, and his land, you know, was stripped from him. And all of a sudden, he was like, you know, totally like depressed. Like, what am I going to do? It was like the worst thing that could happen to somebody, going from riches down to rags. And and he actually like asked his friends, like, what should you do? And his friends were giving him some like really terrible advice, you know, because for a lot of people, if we're living in a material life and we lose all of our material possessions, it can be like, it can seem like the worst thing. But, you know, and it really caused Job to question his faith. And that's kind of where we find this section that we talk about in the gospel according to Spiritism, that what Job is actually questioning his existence. And it's funny because in the gospel according to Spiritism, this section is translated 3 different times, 3 different ways. And I meant to bring my book, but I left it in the back, so I'm going to just try to talk about it. But this section here, he says, if a man dies and is laid low, he breathes his last and he is no more. But then he says, if somebody dies, will they live again? And he says, all the days of my heart service, I will wait for my renewal to come. And in some of the translations, he actually says, it's translated a little different, like, I will wait to live again. And they say, like, well, what did he mean by that? And it's like, actually, Job is starting to question, like, is there a reincarnation? Because his existence doesn't make any sense to him without the idea of reincarnation. And, you know, if you read the book of Job from the Old Testament, you'll see, like, Job actually, he held on to his faith, even though his friends were saying, like, oh, you should just forget it and die, you know, like, just one of his friends, in the translation, I remember very clearly from my youth that his friends said, you know, what I would do is, you know, put on the sackcloth, you know, rub the ashes on your forehead. And he said, curse God and die, you know. And so thankfully, Job didn't listen to his friend's advice. You know, he held on to his faith, and eventually he was rewarded. He, you know, as the story goes, he got a new family and a new land and new cattle, you know. So I guess that's what we have waiting for us. But no, this is Job's story. You know, and this is just one example that Alan Kardec talks about. He mentions it because we're talking about reincarnation, and it actually comes from the Old Testament, which is interesting. And you know, why is this so interesting? Because, like, if you had asked me before I found Spiritism, you know, about reincarnation, I didn't really have much to say about it, and I didn't really understand it, and it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It's sort of like a funny thing to talk about, like, because people would say, like, oh, I'm going to die and come back as, you know, as something else, and, you know, like, I'm going to have to suffer my next life. And some people say it, like, sort of jokingly, but they don't really give it much merit. But, you know, because of the idea, because of the evidence of reincarnation that we get, you know, Alan Kardec goes on to say, only the doctrine of reincarnation can tell human beings where they came from, where they are going, and why they are on the earth, and justify all the anomalies and all the apparent injustices that life presents. Without the principle of the pre-existence of the soul and the plurality of existences, most of the maxims in the gospel are unintelligible, and that is why they have given way to such contradictory interpretations. This principle is the key that must restore them to their true meaning. So for me, it's been kind of interesting to really like go back and look at some of these things that these ideas that I was raised with, that now I have to go back and look at everything a second time and take a fresh perspective and go like, okay, so now I have some new ideas. How can I take these new ideas and apply them to some of these old concepts and see like if they make sense to me again, or or now they make sense. And I always really had that question, like why are some people born with a silver spoon in their mouth, and other people are born into war zones and places that are in real disadvantage, and how does that make sense, and how can I believe in a loving, caring God if I see like people suffering all around me, and even even in my life, I don't have a whole lot I can complain about in my life, but I see like other people that have it better. They look like they have it better. They have all these material comforts, and it's funny because even then, a lot of these people are still miserable. The people that we look at that seem like to have it all, and they still like are looking for something more. And what's the answer? A friend of mine used to say like, I have a God-sized hole in my heart. It's like I can try to get all these things, all these possessions, and work for all these things, but unless I'm trying to like fulfill my spirit, then it's all for nothing. I'm just going to keep searching, keep trying. To me, that's the only thing that ever really made sense. Like, for all the questions that I ever had about existence, like, why me? Like, why was I born this way? Why was I born with these people? Like, why did all these things happen to me? Like, interesting enough, because we study DNA and stuff in science, but that can't really explain a lot of like anomalies that happen, and I don't want to get into it too much, but it's like, it's funny. I look at sort of things like the family that I was born into, and I have like a few specific like differences that don't really make sense if you look at things like genetically or anything that sort of, and I wonder like, why was I given some like unique abilities that my brothers and sisters don't have? They have their own abilities, but I'm just saying like we all, I don't know, sometimes it wouldn't make sense if it weren't for the idea of reincarnation and the fact that we've all lived multiple lives and we have our own experience. We have everything that this entire past to draw from, and we're all we all meeting at this point in our journey, and sometimes to me, like, I always thought everything seemed kind of absurd, but there's really no accidents. We're really here for a reason. There's like something we should be working on, or some work we should be doing, or someone we should be helping, or some experience we should be living. And I always recommend, there's this silly movie with Jim Carrey called Yes Man, where they say yes to everything. And I was a no man when they say like, oh, we're having a party, Saturday night. Be like, oh no, I can't do that. Like, oh, come up here on stage, do some karaoke. Be like, oh no. But now it's like, after I saw that movie, and it's like somebody invited me to a gathering. Somebody invited me to the Spiritist Center at one time, and I said yes. I said, well, I'll get there one day. but don't say yes to absolutely everything, but use it with discretion. But definitely, I recommend, like, we're here on this planet, we have this opportunity, so like, don't let opportunities get wasted. And I don't know, do I have much more to say? I guess we've come to the end of our time, and I hope these talks, like, I heard somebody say one time, and I like to steal other people's stuff, that he said that that giving a talk is really an opportunity. It's not for me to like show you how much I know. It's really an opportunity for me to study and to practice some humility and try to share something with you guys. So I hope something I said might have reached you. By all means, if you have questions or comments. Now I'm not going to be able to actively monitor your comments right now because I'm speaking, but you could always reach out to us on Facebook or YouTube, and yeah, and we have some announcements. So let's go through our announcements. So yeah, if you just click on that. Are we ready? So let's go over our announcements real quick. I wanted to mention, if you're on YouTube, you should subscribe to our YouTube channel, Broward Spiritist Society. But not just that, you can subscribe, but you won't get notifications unless you hit the little bell icon. So a lot of people have shown me like that they subscribe and they hit the bell icon, they get the notifications, and when we go live, they actually get like a pop-up on their phone. I mean, you might not want that, but a lot of people, you really don't want to miss what's going on at Broward Spirit Society because we got a lot of good stuff going on here. So if you don't just subscribe, but hit the bell, highly recommend it. And for that way, you could subscribe, but then it's like, well, I don't know, you might get an email once a week. But you hit the bell, and a lot of times on YouTube we have like our live streams are set up as events, so it'll let you know like before we even go live, like we're going live tonight at 8 p.m. or whatever. So highly recommend hit the bell icon. Or if you're one of those Facebook people, you can like our page, but also don't forget to follow. And in the news feed, I want to say hit see first, or as long as, because you can like a page on Facebook, but if you don't actually follow it, then you won't get like any kind of notification when they go live. And you don't want to miss the stuff that's going on here, I'm telling you. Also, on our YouTube page, Tuesday nights at 7 p.m., Cynthia is still doing the meditation. And 6:30 is in Portuguese, 7 p.m. in English. So check that out. If you can't make it at the time to see it live, you can always come back later. I believe, I don't know if she got a playlist. I think she actually has a meditation playlist, so you could even subscribe to the playlist if you want to like just keep up with the meditation. But check it all out, it's all good. And I believe there's also a Zoom meeting. Correct me if I'm wrong, Manny. But Cynthia and Juan are still doing the meditation, and you can actually join in live and participate, I think on Zoom. So if you want to get in touch with that, if you want to get involved with that, just get in touch with us, and because we can't put the Zoom thing out for everybody, because we don't want to get hacked or anything. But if you want the information and get in touch with us, like through Facebook or YouTube or through WhatsApp, we can hook you up with that. It's also 8 p.m. on Tuesdays, In the Realm of Mediumship, which is a book by Chico Javier, written by Chico Javier and the Spirit Andre Luis, right? That's Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. And I believe this meeting is exclusively on Zoom. Maybe they're on YouTube sometimes or Facebook sometimes, but it's a little too much. So I think Zoom is the way to get in touch with them. Am I right? Also, support our center. This Saturday, we're selling lasagna. Now there's 3 different kinds. There's like a meat, the bolognese, chicken lasagna, and vegetarian lasagna. But if you want to get yours, you have to reserve it ahead of time. So you're going to want to get in touch with us. Let us know, like save your lasagna for Saturday. I ate 3 of them the last time they made lasagnas. I'm not proud of it, but it was that good. I got all 3. I got the chicken, the bolognese, and the vegetarian, just because I'm a yes man. I don't like to miss out on stuff. So let us know. I mean, preferably, today's Wednesday, I'm giving this talk, so preferably by tomorrow or Thursday, because they have to go like get the material, get the ingredients, and make it. So let us know as soon as you can and get in, because you don't want to miss this. This is good stuff. But for now, our center is still closed, but we still have rent to pay. We still have to pay for this extremely fast internet connection that lets us do these high definition live streams. So please help us out if you can. Get in touch with us. Also, mousse de maracujá. I could talk to you about passion fruit mousse. I could give a whole palestra about passion fruit mousse. It makes me feel alive. I don't know what else to tell you about that, but definitely get the lasagna and the passion fruit mousse. Get several. Get them for your friends, your family. You know, I don't know. It's something about passion fruit. It gets you there. Like it's like, woo, I'm hooked. I ordered mine. And that's all for announcements. So to finish it off, we'll do just a quick prayer. So if you'll join me, just take a moment and shifting our attention inward. Let's elevate our vibration. Let's focus on our best qualities. Let's focus on gratitude that we made it through another day. We're grateful for the opportunities that we have each day. I'm grateful for the people we have in our life, our friends, our family, our coworkers, and even the strangers we meet. Everyone is here to teach us a lesson, and every person we meet, we can hold them dear. And let's focus on our best qualities. Let's focus on our patience. Patience being the mother of all virtue. Patience, allowing us to let go of the things that we cannot control, and allowing us to have that calm acceptance and resignation. It's focusing on our humility, that quality that we're no more or no less than what we truly are, and that we're all children of God. We're all God's creation. And we're all brothers and sisters here on this planet Earth. And let's focus on the love. The love we give, the love we receive. And each day we're learning to love more and more. We're learning to love the situation we find ourselves, the choices we make, the people around us. And we learn to live with love, to act with love. We learn to serve joyfully in whatever positions we find ourselves. We can always serve with love. So grateful for this message that we received tonight. May we plant it in our hearts and cultivate these words like seeds that will grow into gorgeous flowers that can blossom forever and ever. May we always carry the light to everyone we meet so they can see, not through our words, but through our actions, that we have the light and we share the light with everyone, and that everyone who sees our light can be a little bit brighter. And we can make this whole world a brighter place. And we can be a point of light in our house, in our job. We can be a point of light here in Pompano Beach or wherever we find ourselves. May we always carry the light. Thank you to our mentors. Thank you to our guides for always guiding us, inspiring us, motivating us. And may tomorrow be another opportunity for us to take the next steps on our personal journey. Thank you, and so be it.